The portal is officially open, leaving all eyes on Matt Painter to see will the Boilermakers bring in any big additions to this young roster.
You are Locked On Boilermakers, your daily podcast on the Purdue Boilermakers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Boilermakers here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the number one sports podcast network where it's your team every day. I am your host. I am Nick Arvin. I talk Boilermakers every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the only daily Purdue show out there. Also write about Purdue for Purdue 24/7. And we've got a fun episode headed your way today because it's day one of the transfer portal. The portal is officially open, the day where you see players commit to teams way too quick and notice that there is a clear tampering issue in college basketball. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about Purdue and specifically what their approach will be, what Matt Painter's approach will be to the transfer portal. Will we bring in anybody in this portal cycle? And then we'll get into Oscar Cluff because he is a huge piece of the puzzle right now for what Purdue is going to do in terms of constructing this roster for next year. We thought we'd have more answers yesterday after the first case, the Zoom hearing in the Robinson case. That really might determine what Oscar Cluff is going to do if he's going to be able to return to Purdue. So I will give you guys some more clarity on that situation in the second segment, and then we'll join Spencer McLaughlin on Locked On College Football. He's great at what he does. We're discussing Purdue, their football schedule for 2026, and why it might be the toughest the Big Ten has to offer. So it's going to be a fun one today. We're going to jump right into things. As always, I really appreciate you guys being here for another episode of Locked On Boilermakers, especially on the first day of the transfer portal being open. And that begs the question, what is Matt Painter? What are these Boilermakers going to do in the transfer portal? Because it's a little bit of an interesting situation this year compared to where we were last year, where you knew last year you needed to find that center. You needed to find that big, in Purdue gets Oscar Cluff. Now, as we sit here, April the 7th, the day after the national championship, not only is Oscar Cluff involved again, but it's in a bit of a different role because as of right now, with Cluff still up in the air, Brody Robinson, his court case about eligibility in JUCO, which we're going to talk about, is still ongoing. So until that ends, we're not going to have an answer on whether Oscar Cluff is going to return or not, leaving a scholarship up in the air because we don't know if that starting center is still going to be there next year. So that throws a little bit of a wrench in terms of Purdue's plans, and it makes it a little bit difficult. It's not the spot that you would want to be in if you're Matt Painter because you really don't know what the situation's going to be like in just a week. So it's tough to get a head start in the transfer portal if you know that you're going to have a hole in your roster, that being Oscar Cluff leaving, because we don't know if he's leaving right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Purdue can't find somebody else in the portal. It is a little bit tricky this year. And this is the biggest thing to think about when you look at Purdue's approach in the portal, because going into this season, you're going to have 4 recruits coming in. That's the recruiting class. And then you have Caden Pierce, who transfers over the winter as a graduate student. That means you've got 5 guys. And you had 4, it looked like, transferring out in Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Coffin-Wren, and potentially Oscar Cluff. Now, if Cluff stays, that goes down from 4 players leaving to 3, leaving a 2-player surplus in terms of the scholarships that you're going to be picked up. Now, you have 15 eligible. The walk-ons are grandfathered in, so they won't apply. But you start to see that when you have that 2-player surplus, it's going to be a little bit difficult to find things to come from in terms of actually having those spots to get guys in the transfer portal. The other bit of this that you have to throw in is who's going to be transferring out. Well, we know it's not Omer Meyer because reports broke that Omer Meyer will be staying at Purdue, but it's a little bit interesting because we haven't heard anything. We haven't heard from the 2 guys that we have suspected might have a chance at transferring, that being Daniel Jacobson and Jakari Harris. They haven't said that they're staying at Purdue. So it's a little bit of an interesting situation. Do they jump in now that the portal is already open, or do we have a guarantee that they will stay at Purdue? Because if both Jakari Harris and Daniel Jacobson stay at Purdue, it gets a little bit tough to see Purdue actually going in to the portal having the idea that we're going to make a splash and we're going to fill that role, just because you're already going to have the small forward. You have a lot of different guys, whether it be an Antoine West, Shakari Harris, even a Jack Benner at that small forward spot. I do think that Purdue is going to need to find a forward, and that's what I want to talk about in terms of the guys that Purdue might actually be going after. Because when I look at this portal and what Purdue is going to want to do, if Purdue is going to make a splash, if they feel like we don't have the guys on our roster right now to be able to compete and go through this transition year with these younger guys and be very competitive in the Big Ten, if Matt Painter feels that way, like he wants to get someone in the transfer portal, I see two categories. One where you're going to have to pay up a lot of NIL money. This is going to be a guy that you want to have on your roster for at least 2 years, and a guy that, although not necessarily realistic, it would be a perfect fit for accelerating this transition period a little bit from the previous era of Purdue basketball. And I really have three guys, maybe more like two, in this category. The first one is someone that I fell in love with when he announced he was transferring from Notre Dame. It's Jalen Harrelson, who balled out in his freshman campaign in South Bend. The issue, though, is he has been entirely linked to the Hoosiers down in Bloomington. I don't think that Purdue is in on him, as much as I would love to keep that Lullamure pipeline going, as much as I would love to have a forward alongside a Caden Pierce in that front quarter. I guess he would technically be in the backcourt, be more like a wing alongside Caden Pierce. The fit is a little bit iffy because he doesn't shoot the three ball particularly well. He's going to command a lot of NIL money, and as I mentioned, Indiana is still in on him, and they're pretty hot on the trails of a guy that they were in the final three for Harrelson coming out of high school. So I think the Hoosiers might have Harrelson locked up right now, as much as that was the guy number one on my big board for guys that I wanted Matt Painter to bring in a perfect world. So let's take Harrelson off the list for a little bit, and let's get a little bit more realistic with it. If Purdue isn't going to get one of those big name guys, because I truly don't think that Painter is in a position right now to want to chase a guy that's going to command $3 to $4 to $5 million in NIL money. I think we're looking at a more realistic scenario where we're going to want to go after one of those mid-major guys that they're forwards, they can shoot the three ball extremely well, because that's really what this team needs, alongside Caden Pierce, who is going to be a staple of this team next year. Pierce, he's excellent. Won Ivy League Player of the Year for a reason, but he doesn't shoot the three ball at a high rate. So I've got a couple guys that I do think would be perfect fits, and realistically, some guys that Painter could bring in. Someone left a comment on the episode the other day when we talked about players that might leave and shouted out Brody Robinson of Fairfield. I loved what I saw in Brody Robinson, and I think this is the type of prototype of player that Painter would want to bring in. A mid-major guy from Fairfield, but still a player that's physical, a big forward that can produce on not just the boards, but also offensively. That's what Brody Robinson has, but he doesn't necessarily shoot the three ball. And once again, that's what Purdue is going to have to recruit. You need guys that can shoot the three alongside a front court, whether that be a Caden Pierce, or if Oscar Cluff sticks around, you're still going to need guys that can shoot it from three. Even if you have a Daniel Jacobson or a Raleigh Burgess, the point still remains. So that's why I love the two guys that I think Purdue should go after. It's Sam Orme from Belmont. He went to Carmel, Indiana for high school, then goes to Belmont in college. He shoots the three ball pretty well, right around 40%. Physical forward, can stretch out the floor, but also can get it inside. I like Sam Orme out of Belmont, but this last guy, extremely impressive. He played at IUPUI to start out his collegiate career. I guess IU Indy now, but it's DeSean Goode at Robert Morris. He shoots it at the forward position over 57% from three-point range. Yes, you heard me, 57% from 3-point range, which is unheard of, but that's what DeSean Goode brings in. So you have that category of realistic guys that Painter could bring in, and I could absolutely see that, bringing in a guy from a mid-major, a physical forward that can produce on the offensive side that's not going to command too much in NIL funds, but it's also going to give you day one production out of that forward spot. That's what this team needs. As much as I would love to see Purdue get a guy like a Paulus Morauskas or see a Trey Singleton go to Purdue, even a Jalen Harrelson, if somehow he doesn't go to Bloomington, I just don't think that's realistic right now for what this team needs. We need youth. We need guys that can produce day one and guys that are going to be able to accelerate this transition period. As Braden Smith, these seniors, they hand the baton over to the future of Purdue basketball. I don't know if Painter will go after someone in the transfer portal, but if he does, you want someone that's going to embody that black and gold. That's why I think a Sam Orme or a DeSean Goode, guys with Indiana ties that can really produce for you because they've done it before, I think that would be the perfect option for this team. But we'll see how it goes as the week progresses. A big factor right now, though, and what Purdue does in the transfer portal is Oscar Cluff, because we don't know. Is he staying? Is he going? Well, a court case going on right now might determine it. We talked about it yesterday, didn't get the clarity we wanted yesterday, but there's still some things that we can take away. So we're going to get into that here next on Locked On Boilermakers. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Well, now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market where you can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter, because Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when the momentum shifts, you can move with it. And I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way of actually applying that knowledge. But now I can take part live in a market powered by the people where you're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. So trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission and swap firm. We've been monitoring the case of Brody Robinson here on Locked On Boilermakers because it pertains to Oscar Cluff. And with that, it will likely set the framework for, is Oscar Cluff eligible? Is he not? Because Cluff has already said that he's coming back to West Lafayette if he gets that eligibility. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We had a whole episode yesterday breaking down the Brody Robinson case, what that means for Oscar Cluff and why it pertains to him, why it's relevant to what his eligibility situation is going to look like. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and watch that video. But we're going to get into some clarification because yesterday was the first piece of that case where you have the initial Zoom call. We thought that we were going to have some answers. And the reason why that Zoom trial was set up the day it was because it was the day before the transfer portal opened up. And it's relevant because for Brody Robinson, it's not necessarily seen if he's going to transfer from Oakland or if he's not. So as this case continues to go on, as he doesn't know about his eligibility, if he does get ruled that he's eligible, it ruins his chances to get into the portal early and to start meeting with teams if it does get pushed back a little bit later. And that's ultimately what the result of yesterday was. We didn't get much news. And as the day progressed, I kept checking, I kept looking to see if we could get news from the Zoom trial that happened yesterday in the Brody Robinson case. But ultimately, the only news that we really got coming out of yesterday, and it was disappointing, was that a separate date has been set up for this Friday, where hopefully, and this is what was said, was that reported by Joe Tipton, they are going to address a preliminary injunction, which should decide, is Brody Robinson eligible for the time being to enter the transfer portal and seek eligibility for a different program. So although we didn't get answers yesterday, it should happen Friday, but this is unfortunate for Purdue, because you would have liked to have a little bit of clarity for Oscar Cluff yesterday, which was ideal. That was the goal. And that's what we talked about yesterday, how we wanted to have answers. Hopefully we were going to have answers yesterday, because as of right now, the Boilermakers are a little bit held up because we don't know what's going to happen with Oscar Cluff. And that affects what's going to happen with Purdue. Do they have the ability to go to the transfer portal? And are we going to need to find another center in the portal? And that's something that I've really kind of talked about a lot, because I don't necessarily believe in Daniel Jacobson. I don't necessarily believe in a Raleigh Burgess, as talented as he may be, to be the starting center for a Big Ten program as of right now. I'm not saying that Jacobson can't be a stud at center, because I absolutely do believe he's capable of being that. But as of right now, we've seen he's a bit of a defensive liability. He doesn't have the physicality to compete down low. That doesn't mean that can change, but when we look at what this team's going to look like going into this next year, I don't feel comfortable with having Daniel Jacobson starting at center. That's why Cluff coming back would be so crucial to this team, because you're going to have experience. You're going to have a guy that's ready to start day one, because he already has, and to be a good fit alongside the rest of these younger guys that are coming up and trying to develop into players that can bring Purdue to hopefully a Final Four once again. That's what Cluff provides. And another thing that I want to hit on, because there are some comments out there surrounding these two cases, because Brody Robinson and Cluff, their situation isn't necessarily the same, but it is at the same time. And the reason why I say this is because Brody Robinson only played 1 year of JUCO ball, where Cluff played 2. So this year, the waiver last year that was set up by Diego Pavia, where he applied for eligibility, was set over all of college athletics, stating that JUCO years would not count towards overall eligibility. That's why Diego Pavia was able to play 6 years. That's why Oscar Cluff was able to play his 5th year last year. However, with that being said, the big part in that is that all JUCO years would not count towards eligibility, just as Diego Pavia was able to play 6 years. If the same waiver were to apply, according to Brody Robinson, if he's able to get that injunction on Friday, it should be said that all JUCO years will not count towards eligibility. So just because Brody Robinson would be on 5, Oscar Cluff would be on 6, it would make no difference. So their situations are a little bit different, but as I said, they're the same, because none of the JUCO years would count towards their overall eligibility. That's what we're looking at right now. All our eyes now shift till Friday to try to find some groundwork for what this case is going to look like going forward. But as we sit right now, this is not good for Purdue. You want the Brody Robinson case to be settled as soon as possible, one way or the other. You either know that Cluff is leaving or you know that he's staying, but you're in a little bit of a precarious situation right now, where you're being held up by the fact that this case keeps being pushed forward, and it's ongoing without any answers. Because as we sit right now, it really does ruin your ability to chase after either a starting center or another big, a forward in the transfer portal, because number one, you don't know what that center position is going to look like, and number two, you don't know what your scholarship situation is going to look like going into next year. So it's an interesting situation for Purdue, but just to recap, here's where we are. The Monday case, the day before the transfer portal opened, the Zoom hearing, we didn't get much. All we got was that there was going to be a separate trial happening on Friday, a separate court date rather, where we should have answers on the preliminary injunction, which would give Brody Robinson a path to either staying at Oakland or transferring, with the hopes in ideally having that extra year of eligibility. If that is the case, it would set the groundwork for Oscar Cluff to also have that eligibility, because the 2 years that he plays compared to Brody Robinson's 1 year in JUCO, it doesn't make a difference, because none of those JUCO years would count against the eligibility. So Oscar Cluff right now holding up Purdue a little bit, but we should have more answers as the weeks progress. Hopefully this doesn't hang around too long, because we need some clarity on what Purdue is actually going to be able to do in this transfer portal. Oscar Cluff is a huge piece of the puzzle in that, but we should have some more answers. And as things progress, we'll definitely know more information. But I'll keep you guys updated as this case progresses, so we know exactly what's happening with Oscar Cluff. But coming up here next in this final segment of Locked On Boilermakers, we're talking exactly what's going to happen with Purdue football this year as they feature one of the toughest schedules in the Big Ten. Will that hurt them? Will that help them as we try to get a little bit of rebuilding going in the Barry Odom era? Well, I'm talking with Spencer McLaughlin about all of that coming up here next on Locked On Boilermakers. But first, the NBA playoffs are almost here, where every possession matters, every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. And I love FanDuel because you can bet just $5 to get $250 back in bonus bets if your first bet wins. It makes the entire playoff experience more engaging from start to finish. And although my Pacers aren't it, I'm always keeping track, always watching every game in the NBA playoffs, and it makes it even better with FanDuel. So head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game.
If you want to see a difficult road slate in the Big Ten, look no further than what Barry Odom's team will have to endure in 2026. Nick Arvin of Locked On Boilermakers is here to discuss what I've seen some outlets rate as the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. I think Northwestern has to be in that conversation as well for most difficult schedule. But when you encapsulate all of the teams on the Boilermakers schedule, they have a non-conference with Notre Dame. They play one of the most random games, but kind of fun, in college football on September 12th when they host Wake Forest in there's a lot of brown, okay? There's a lot of brown and black happening in that game, or tan, whatever the official color scheme is of those schools. There's a lot of it on the field there in West Lafayette. We'll get to spring updates, but there's a reason that Purdue is tied for the lowest win total in the Big Ten, according to our friends at FanDuel, right?
I would say that there's definitely something to that, Spencer. We look at what Purdue's done the last 2 years on the football side of things. Haven't won a conference game in that span. So we go into this season, we see the schedule, as you mentioned, one of, if not the toughest schedules in all the Big Ten, and it's tough to see how that's going to change. But for Barry Odom and this team going into the spring, there is some renewed hope that he was able to get the guys that he wanted in the transfer portal to try to build this program back up so that maybe, just maybe, this will be the year we finally get that conference game, or conference win, rather, out of the way. That sucks to say, but that's where we're at in West Lafayette right now.
Yeah, it's tough. You know, it wasn't a great situation that Ryan Walters left behind. He wasn't given a bunch of time. And if the same timeline is applied to Barry Odom, by the way, he could be fired after this year, which I don't think would be a good look for the Boilermakers program personally, but we'll just have to see. You know, the Big Ten road slate, I'm just talking about the road games here, having Illinois, Penn State, Iowa, and Indiana is tough enough. At least there's no Oregon, Ohio State, or Michigan on here. But you throw the Notre Dame game in there, you got to host Minnesota and Washington. We'll see what Wisconsin is this year. It could be worse. It seriously, I think, you could be Northwestern. You know, Northwestern's got, I think, the worst schedule, or toughest in the entire Big Ten. They have to play 11 straight games with a bye after week 1. Nobody understands who they ticked off. They're just Northwestern. How does anybody hate Northwestern? What did they ever do? They never bothered anybody. They just gave teams a bunch of wins. So if you look at this schedule, Nick, what's the most winnable game in Big Ten play?
In Big Ten play, I think at UCLA is an interesting one because they're kind of going through a transition period right now, and you've got them game 3 of the year right after Wake Forest. I don't necessarily know if you're going to win that one on the road, but I definitely think there's a possibility there. In terms of the most winnable game, I've got to go Minnesota at Ross-Ade. I think that game is in October the 10th. Is Minnesota.
Over Maryland? You're going Minnesota over Maryland.
I mean, I don't know. I think Maryland's a winnable game as well. Both of these games are winnable for Purdue, but I said that last year as well, and Ryan Brown ended up turning the ball over in pivotal moments against that team, costing Purdue wins. So I think it's a toss-up, like you said, between a Maryland, between a Minnesota. But I just look at this team right now, and I see a team that they're going to have a big year. And to your point earlier, we talked a little bit off the show about this, but you look at rivalry weekend, that used to be a gimme for Purdue. Indiana used to be a team like kind of Purdue is now, where that would be a free win. But now you bake that in, and having to play Indiana, having to play them in Bloomington, the former last year's national champions, that's a little bit tough when you also throw in having to travel to Penn State. But I like a couple of those games throughout the middle of the schedule. Maybe Minnesota will be the game where Purdue finally gets that conference win.
Missing three of the top teams in the league this year. USC is not in the schedule. They played them last year and lost in a competitive battle at home. Yeah. It's the road slate that I look at and go, yeah. I mean, is UCLA the worst place to go? No, but Illinois, Penn State, Iowa, Indiana, it just feels like you can just start with 4 losses. Notre Dame makes it 5 right off the bat to me. But let's pivot away from the schedule specifically and talk about what has been going on during spring practice for Purdue. Is there a reason for optimism? Just in the vein of anything to make you believe Purdue could go over their 3.5 win total?
I think there's certainly some optimism, because I do think that this roster is constructed a little bit better than it was in the first year of the Barry Odom era, where almost last year, and it was a little bit tough for me, because you want to have optimism when you have a first-year head coach. You want to have that faith that they're going to be able to turn the program around, especially when you look a couple hours down the road and you see what Curt Cignetti did in year 1 and then continuing into the next couple in Bloomington. You want to have that same hope for Barry Odom. But last year, he proved that this wasn't a team ready to win yet. This year, I do think that we have a few more pieces. I think the team is constructed more in a way where you might win some games. And specifically when we look at Ryan Brown, who was a guy last year extremely turnover prone. He showed some flashes throughout the course of the season, but I don't feel like the roster construction really allowed for him to go to his strengths. I think where Ryan Brown is at his best is where he can manage the game, use his legs to improvise, but it takes a heavy running attack with a big offensive line with solid backfield production to be able to get him there. So you have Antonio Harris, who's kind of the up-and-coming running back for us. He showed out during spring ball, but you also bring in a guy in Jarrett Gibson, running back out of Texas, who was a solid transfer, I thought, to try to get that 1-2 punch for Purdue right now in the running game. And then on the offensive line, Purdue also does get some solid additions, I thought, in the portal. We lose a lot of our offensive linemen, but you get Boaz Stanley from South Carolina. You also get Jatavius Shivers from South Carolina and 2 USC Southern California guys, and Mekhi Sinai and Mekhi Bonalos. I apologize, but those 2 guys, they're going to be solid. So I think the offensive line is going to be a lot better. I think it's a more run-heavy attack compared to last year, and I honestly think that that's going to do a lot of good for Ryan Brown as he tries to get those turnovers under wraps a little bit going into next year.
Is there any pressure on Barry Odom because of what Indiana has done across the way?
100%. I mean, it's tough. And I mean, I just said it. That game used to be one Purdue leads heavily in the all-time series in the bucket game, but that used to be one where Purdue fans would say, we're going to at least get a win here. Now that's not the case. And in fact,
now it's hard to see when Purdue's going to beat Indiana again.
Yeah, I went to Ross Aid this last year to catch that game, and it was a blowout by halftime. So it's tough for Purdue fans right now to kind of look at that game and say, I mean, honestly, you have to realize that we're probably going to lose that one anymore, as much faith as Purdue fans want to have. But I think there's certainly pressure from Curt Cignetti, but we have to hold realistic expectations for Purdue right now. Barry Odom is not Curt Cignetti, as much as I would hope or love for him to be that guy. He's just not, and he's got to prove that he's capable of turning this team into a squad that can just make a bowl game before we have conversations about what Cignetti's done. But I do think there is pressure on Barry Odom from a perspective of Ryan Walters was fired after his second year at Purdue, and the season Barry Odom had last year was much worse than Ryan Walters' first season at Purdue. Now, I know the situations are a little bit different, but if that's the standard that was set by Mike Babinski and the AD to fire Ryan Walters after year 2, what happens to Barry Odom if he has a similar season to last year? So from a pressure perspective, I would say it's more so, can Barry Odom prove that he deserves year 3 in West Lafayette? If not, I think it would be even more catastrophic of a situation for Purdue than we're even sitting at as of right now in spring ball. But there is some optimism for my Boilermakers. I think that we have a chance to turn it around this year, but I am cautiously optimistic.
The insanity of Curt Cignetti and the speed with which we've all just accepted how great he is and what he's built at Indiana, the equivalent would indeed be Barry Odom winning a national championship at Purdue. Actually, it wouldn't be equivalent, because Purdue's been a significantly more winning football program over the last 15 years than Indiana.
It puts it into perspective how great Curt Cignetti is. And I hate to say that because they're all rivals, but appreciate greatness. And that dude.
Unbelievable. Man. It's unbelievable. Like, can anyone envision Purdue winning the 2027 national championship? Because just try to picture that in your mind and then realize that turnaround would still have taken longer than what Cignetti did at Indiana. There's nothing like it. All right, Boilermaker fans probably tired of me gassing up Curt Cignetti there. Nick Arvin, Locked On Boilermakers. Appreciate the time. I appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.